Good evening, everyone. I'm Kip Cornwell. I'm the Dean of Seton Hall Law School, and it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome you all to this outstanding event. It is so exciting for all of us to be back live in a packed room, engaging in conversation about incredibly important issues of the day. While I am a criminal law scholar, you don't need a criminal law scholar to tell you how important bail reform is. It's an issue that's critically important across the country, and it's certainly energized the tri-state area. So it is really exciting to have this esteemed panel here tonight to talk about that issue and all of the surrounding and competing concerns that it presents. Again, I want to welcome everyone. I want to thank the Christie Institute and the governor for putting this together. Thank you very much. And I'd like to kick tonight's festivities off with an invocation from the law school chaplain, Father Nicholas Gingaro.
In chapter 4 of his gospel, Luke depicts the beginning of the public ministry of Jesus on the Sabbath in his hometown synagogue at Nazareth. Jesus is handed a scroll of the prophet Isaiah, from which he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord." The passage read with some embellishment by Jesus, as was the custom, is Isaiah 61, 1-2. This program opens recognizing the deep roots in the Judeo-Christian ethical tradition of the concern on the part of society's leaders for criminal justice and the treatment of prisoners. In the Catholic Jubilee year 2000, Pope John Paul II visited the Regina Coeli prison in Rome, and afterwards at the Angelus blessing made a plea to the crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square. He said, "I especially ask lawmakers throughout the world to rethink the prison system and the penal system itself in order to make it more respectful of human dignity, in accord with a justice that redeems the offender and not only repairs the disorder caused by crime. Those who have made mistakes must be helped to begin a process of moral redemption and personal and community growth for their effective return to society." Regina Coeli, you see, was the prison where John Paul II's would-be assassin was serving a life sentence until 1 month before the Pope's 2000 visit. After serving 19 years, Mehmet Ali Agha had been pardoned by the Italian president at the Pope's request and sent back to his native Turkey. Let us pray. Lord our God, may your Spirit enlighten us in the application of restorative justice, even as we seek to do everything possible to prevent crime and control it effectively so that it no longer does harm. May we offer to those who commit crimes a way of redeeming themselves and making a positive return to society. Teach us to be wise and measured in our political judgment, neither naive when confronting wrongdoing, nor harsh when regarding the wrongdoer. Show the way to break the cycle of crime and violence. Protect the innocent and vulnerable so that all may flourish in a more serene and peaceful society. Both victim and perpetrator are dear to you. Lord, grant inspiration this evening to our distinguished speakers and exceptional audience alike. May our time together be well spent. Bless Governor Chris Christie, Mrs. Christie, Chair Bill Palatucci, and all who work to advance the mission of the Christie Institute for Public Policy. All these prayers are offered with firm faith in you as we say now together, Amen.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. All right. In the spirit of the Institute's mission, McGreevy started the applause. I want to thank all of you for being here. This is our first in-person event since February of 2020, when we had Henry Kissinger speak to us about this condition of the world in February 2020. And then 1 month later, the condition of the world changed rather significantly. And we've had a number of events since then, but all of them, unfortunately, have had to have been by Zoom. I'm glad that we're back in person here, and we'll be doing some future events that we'll announce soon here at the law school in the remainder of this semester. A few thank yous. I want to thank the entire panel. You're going to get to meet all of them, but each one of them has played an integral role in reforming the criminal justice system in this state and creating the success of that system that New Jersey has been over the last half a decade or more. I want to also thank Bill Palatucci, who's the chairman of the Institute, Michelle Brown, who's the executive director of the Institute, for putting this event together tonight. I appreciate their hard work very much. And there are lots of friends and distinguished, accomplished people in the audience. I will not start naming them or I'll go over the time that I was generously given by Ms. Brown. So we don't want to do that. But I do want to thank the members of my cabinet who are here tonight, all of whom played an integral role in the accomplishments of our administration, and in particularly this one. I'm going to leave the substance to the group sitting to my right. But what I will tell you is that we have a country right now that seems to be crying out, or at least they say they're crying out, for some bipartisan accomplishment, for both parties who run the political system in our country to work together. And this piece of legislation that has now been the law for a number of years is the product of that work. It could not have been done or accomplished without our governor's office being willing to work with Senator Sandy Cunningham, who was the main sponsor of all of this legislation, Senate President Sweeney, and Speaker Prieto during that period of time to do something that was not being done at that time around the rest of the country. And I'm proud that we work together to do it the right way. And I think that's what you're going to hear about tonight, is that New Jersey has done this the right way and is serving as a model for those who want to do this the right way, not the political way. And there's lots of politics being played with this issue right now. And one of the goals of the Institute is to try to make sure that the truth is told about public policy. I said to Judge Grant this evening, we were up in the elevator together, and he said, "Thanks for doing this." I said, "Well, hell, I've had to defend so many mistakes that we made over time. When we actually get it right, it's nice to come and defend it. That makes it a lot easier." And this is one of the things that we did very, very well. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to the dean for being our partner in all this, and the university. Thank the provost for being here as well, representing President Nyer and the rest of the university, and Chairman Marino, the chairman of the Board of Regents, for being here as well. Seton Hall has been incredibly supportive of our mission, and Mary Pat and I are really, really very gratified that you're doing that. So thank you all for coming tonight. I will turn it over to Bill to moderate the conversation with our great panelists tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Governor. To get started here, about a week ago, as Michelle was doing a great job publicizing the event tonight, got a call from an old friend. John Kufos, who you're going to hear from in just a second, had taken a new position with an entity I hadn't heard of, and said, "This is exactly what we are working on," and wanted to know if he could be prime sponsor of the event tonight. And so Michelle, being the smart woman she said, "Absolutely." And, but we wanted to first learn about Arnold Ventures and John's role about it. And so John doesn't really need, I think, much of an introduction to this crowd. If you've been around criminal justice issues in New Jersey over the last decade or more, you know John Kufos. Go home tonight and Google John Kufos, and you'll see him in the Oval Office, you'll see him on C-SPAN, and you'll see him throughout New Jersey doing great service to folks. But now he has a new position as the Director of Advocacy for Arnold Ventures, and so they are our prime sponsor tonight, so we've asked John to say a few words to introduce Arnold Ventures to all of us. John?
Thank you all. I'll be brief. Governor Christie, thank you as always, and great to see Governor McGreevey, who all the nice things that Bill just said about me wouldn't be possible without the belief that Governor McGreevey put in me and that Governor Christie put in me during our reentry work for about a decade. I'm really blessed to be at Arnold Ventures. At Arnold Ventures, we help fund impactful issues. And when I talk about impactful issues, I'm talking about data-driven, evidence-based issues that drive the public safety conversation and that make sure that opportunity reaches all. New Jersey's bail reform, of course, is the crown jewel of bail reform across our country. It's something that represents the highest level of bipartisanship, as Governor Christie said, and it's something that we think that other states should be replicating. And I think that it's really no surprise to see innovation in New Jersey. And even though I'm in DC now, I never miss an opportunity to dunk on New York if I can and say how much better we've done something than them, as I know all of my colleagues do as well. But I think that New Jersey has been synonymous with innovation in so many ways, right? I mean, just look right now with what the Attorney General's doing on Arrive Together, what Prosecutor Reynolds in Atlantic County is doing, the intersection of public health and public safety, and so many other great things. We are honored at Arnold Ventures to be a part of this. We hope this is the beginning of many things together. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill, and thank you again.
Okay, so we have a lot to do, so let's get to it. Let me introduce this panel here. Really needs no introduction, I know, to this crowd, but we will do that. I made that actually mistake with Henry Kissinger. The governor walked Henry Kissinger in. You know, he's very frail, he's 90-something, and the governor sat him down, and I introduced the governor, and I said, and the man who needs no introduction, Secretary Kissinger. Secretary Kissinger got up and said, I love introductions. I love to be introduced. So introduce this great panel that people who know here well. I'll go in order here. Everybody knows Chris Perino, former Attorney General in New Jersey, but also importantly for tonight was Chief Counsel to Governor Christie, and also a partner in the great Lowenstein firm. So Chris, thank you for being here. Jeff Chiesa. Jeff, congratulations. That was a great event last night. Like most of this crowd was here at the grand opening of CSG Law. I can say Chiesa and Giantomasi, but Shaheen is hard for me. But little known fact, the governor and I and Jeff practiced law together 100 years ago. So, but Jeff also served as Attorney General, Chief Counsel to the governor, as well as the United States Attorney for the state of New Jersey. So Jeff, thank you for being here. Thank you. Judge Grant is here, who plays such a critical role in the issue that we're talking tonight as the administrator of the Office of the Courts. And so, Judge, thank you so much for being here tonight. Joe Krikora. Joe has been, for the past decade, the New Jersey Public Defender. Great experience in this issue. So, Joe, thank you for being here with us. And an old friend of mine, people may not know this, conservative Republican and Alex go way back, but we go way back on other topics. But Alex is the Senior Supervising Attorney and Director of the Supreme Court Advocacy for the ACLU in New Jersey. Alex, thank you so much for being here. So let me kick it right off with General Perino here. And Jeff has had lots of experience in New Jersey in law, headed up the Division of Law, as well as being Chief Counsel to the Governor and then the Attorney General. But Chris, we want you to start tonight putting your old hat on as Chief Counsel to the Governor and telling us how we got here. I learned long ago from another successful Republican two-term governor, Governor Kane, that it's the intersection of policy and politics that gets things done. The greatest idea in the world, but if you don't know how to get it done, it doesn't mean anything. So if you can take us back 20 2013 and before in 2014, how this came about, the constitutional amendment and the law. Can you and your role at that point as chief counsel?
Sure, thanks, Bill. So before I had the privilege to serve in any of those incredible roles for the governor, and before this reform that we're here to talk about passed in 2014 and became effective in 2017, I was a criminal defense lawyer. And so I thought I'd just spend a minute or two and talk about how the bail system worked back then. It was pretty simple. If you were arrested and charged with a crime and you had money, you'd make bail and get out of jail. If you were arrested and charged with a crime and you didn't have access to money, you wouldn't get out of jail prior to trial. Judges didn't have the power to detain someone without setting bail. That was the way the system worked, and bail was a requirement of the New Jersey Constitution. Crazy as it sounds, in addition to not being able to detain a defendant without setting bail, judges weren't allowed to consider dangerousness to the community. So a judge could think about how likely it was that the defendant was going to come back to court, how great the risk of flight was, but judges weren't allowed to consider how dangerous that person would be if they were let back out on the street. So the system was really very flawed. And there are two examples that I like to try and use to explain how flawed the system was. The first is, think of a mother who is accused of stealing a turkey from a grocery store on Thanksgiving. Bail is set for her at $1,500. And if she can't afford to pay for the turkey, she certainly can't afford to make bail, no matter how low the bail is. So she stays in jail until her case is resolved. That could take months and months if she doesn't plead guilty first. And remember, this person would not actually be sentenced, will never be sentenced to jail for stealing a turkey on Thanksgiving. So the person is serving time in jail because she can't afford to make bail. Once sentenced, she's released. The other example, the other side of the coin, is the drug dealer who murders, a whole family. Bail is set, pre-reform, at $5 million. That person has access to wealth and assets. He or she makes bail and walks out of jail in a couple of days. He's back dealing drugs and hurting people under the old system. Again, the judge couldn't consider dangerousness to the community. So that flawed system operated for decades and decades. Enter Governor Chris Christie. Back in 2012, more than 10 years ago, Governor Christie called for changes to this very broken system. And in his 2012 State of the State address, Governor Christie explained, quote, "We can only improve our quality of life by keeping the most violent criminals off the streets. So I ask you to approve my bail reform package, which would mirror the federal system. It would keep offenders with a history of violence who are a danger to our communities in jail until the time of their trial, instead of releasing them into society to prey on the public. This may require a constitutional amendment, but it is a reform that is long overdue." And wow, was he right. Chief Justice Rabner, shortly thereafter, established what was called the Joint Committee on Criminal Justice to study the problem and how to fix it. Stakeholders from all walks of life, Republicans, Democrats, defense lawyers, prosecutors, activists, from across the board, that committee came together, reached consensus about a year later, and issued a report in 2014 talking about how to implement the changes that Governor Christie described in his 2012 State of the State address. So now the governor's got the executive branch, of course, on board. He's got the judicial branch of government on board and supporting the reforms. But, as may not come much of a surprise, and I apologize to sitting legislators who are here, the legislature was not moving. And in 2014, the governor, again at the State of the State address, forcibly restated the issue. The governor said, quote, "Almost 2 years ago, I announced a proposed constitutional amendment to modify the right to bail in New Jersey. The concept is simple. New Jersey courts should have the right to keep a dangerous criminal off the street and in jail until trial. He continued, the federal government allows a violent criminal who's a danger to the community to be held without bail. New Jersey law does not. This must change. Legislature finally introduced measures to amend the Constitution and create new standards for pretrial detention. Having introduced it didn't mean they passed it. And by July of 2014, neither of the bills that needed to be passed to get this done had been passed. And August 4 of 2014 was the deadline. The bills had to pass by then in order to get the question on the ballot so the New Jersey Constitution could be amended. And just a second on why the Constitution had to be amended. The New Jersey Constitution required that all persons before conviction be, quote, bailable by sufficient securities. That meant that defendants had a constitutional right to bail, and in order to fix this problem and to effectuate the reform, the Constitution had to be changed. And in order to amend the Constitution, you have to let the voters vote on it. There has to actually be a question on the ballot. So facing the July 4th deadline, the governor uses authority under the Constitution to convene a special emergency session of the legislature on July 31st, 2014, calling the entire legislature back from wherever they were on vacation in the middle of the summer. Following that address, the Senate acted quickly and passed the reforms. Consideration in the Assembly, however, was delayed. The bail bonds industry, in my view, woke up, got busy with their lobbying efforts, and claims all of a sudden started to be made about the reforms being racist and a conspiracy against poor people. In the end, Governor Christie prevailed. The Assembly concurred with the Senate. The act was signed into law, and the constitutional amendment was placed on the ballot and approved by the voters by a margin of almost 62% in November of 2014. The amendment and the act took effect, as I said earlier, on January 1st, 2017. And let me just say, I shared this somewhat detailed background because I wanted to try and help illustrate how difficult it was to achieve this delicate balance between detaining dangerous criminals on the one hand and freeing non-dangerous ones on the other. And remember, the state of New Jersey achieved this reform, achieved this balance, and they did it across party lines. It was accomplished by a Republican governor and a Democrat-controlled legislature with a strong assist by the judiciary. The Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2017 was and still is the most significant change to New Jersey's criminal justice system in modern history. It has worked extraordinarily well, and part of the message that I think you're going to hear tonight is that we shouldn't go about changing it until we're really sure that it needs to be changed. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Chris. It's an important history. As you said, compromise was an important element of that. Jeff, I want to take you back being in your role as Attorney General and talk about implementation, working with 21 county prosecutors, working with the large Department of Law and Public Safety, something now completely new, to have a risk-based system. But also want you to do that with also, to some of the points that Chris was making, you also served as a federal prosecutor with the governor when he was in the U.S. Attorney and you was Assistant U.S. Attorney. And so if you can compare and contrast a little bit the tools that were available to you as a federal prosecutor, but not as Attorney General, and then the change that happened once the constitutional amendment passed and the law was changed.
Sure, and as many of you know, the July 4th calling back the legislature became an annual event in the Christie administration. So, very effective, by the way, Gov. So one of the things, and I look back, Gov, when we were to see when this date was, it was February 2012. We had a press conference to announce the change being proposed to the Constitution to address this issue. And like Charlie McKenna, who's here, and Michelle Brown, who also served in the governor's office, those of us from the U.S. Attorney's Office had always been used to having dangerousness to the community as part of the arguments for making sure that we were keeping communities safe when we made these arguments for detention. The notion that if you committed a criminal act here in Newark, and depending upon whether the state police arrested you or the FBI arrested you determined how your bail was going to be determined makes absolutely no sense. And if you ask the members that live in those communities if they think that's a good idea, my guess is they would say no. And so giving that tool to the judges to use as they make these considerations was critically important. I looked back, and the one statistic that struck me in 2012 was 1,500 people were in jail in 2012 on $2,500 or less of bail. 2,500. Bail reform comes, and by 2021, the number is 4. 4 people. Think about that impact, and think about those families who had to have a mom or a dad who wasn't any kind of danger to anybody, but didn't have the resources for 2,500. The disruption that happened to those families and the things that were going on. Meanwhile, as General Perino pointed out, folks who committed heinous acts and had access to resources had a chance to go back out and to continue to doing what they were doing. And so, to me, this was, from a law enforcement perspective, if our mission is public safety, and that is what the mission is, despite what we see in other parts of the country and what's said about law enforcement, that's the mission. And if that's the mission, and we're not going to have that tool about public safety being part of the equation, it makes no sense to anybody. So the governor took on what was another incredibly difficult issue because it made sense for the state. As General Perino pointed out, did all the things that he did to make sure that it happened. In my view, as a former law enforcement person and someone who cares deeply about the issues that affect law enforcement, nothing's perfect. But man, we've come a long way. Just think about the part that I talked about, going from 1,500 people to 4. That really struck me in a way that was pretty overwhelming. And I'm sure other panels will talk about that. I think it was in one of your reports, Judge, that fact was noted. And as we continue along this, we hear the complaints about, well, this happened, and certainly during the pandemic, we saw a rise in criminal activity. We just did, for many reasons I'm probably not qualified to talk about, but we did. What immediately happens is, well, what happened? What changed? Other than the pandemic, what changed since then? Well, it's bail reform. And so immediately it's, well, bail reform must be the problem. Not the problem. This, as I said, nothing is perfect, but the steps that were taken, the goals that were identified, and the goals that are now being achieved are obvious to anyone who cares about the safety of the communities and making sure that we're protecting communities and not just imprisoning people because they don't have $1,500 in Chris's example before to get out of jail. And when you read some of the, and the public defender and Alex may talk about this, but I remember reading some of the collateral consequences that happened in those situations, and Chris gave you one. Those are real life consequences. Those are moms and dads who are calling their kids and saying, I'm sorry, despite all the efforts I've made to be a good parent and to be in your lives, I can't come home because I don't have $1,500. I don't know if the state's going to come take my kids. I don't know if there's going to be other repercussions, but it's a cascading effect of events that happened, and we're no safer. We're no safer. And on the other hand, we have folks who had resources, who were committed to a life of violence and disruption in our communities, who could buy their way out of those situations. So this effort, the things that the governor did to make sure that this happened was a seismic change and an incredibly positive change in keeping our communities safe. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Judge, you've had the incredibly difficult job of implementation. Jeff and Chris outlined how it got done, and what the goals were. I think you have got some information to share in terms of what the results have been and real data and specific, just that data and numbers to talk about what's been accomplished. Let me turn it over to you to do that.
So one of the challenges of going after two outstanding attorney generals is much of my presentation has already been discussed. But I still want to talk about the importance of outstanding leadership. Success is driven by talented and dedicated leadership, and you heard Chris describe the governor's dedicated leadership to advancing this initiative. A similar thought needs to be recognized with regards to the other partners in making this possible. And so I want to talk about the Chief Justice statement. The goal here was to create a fairer and better system of criminal justice based on objective risk factors that are not related to a person's wealth, that the new system will promote public safety by allowing judges to detain high-risk defendants at the same time protecting the liberty and interests of poor, low-risk defendants who were released on conditions and monitored by pretrial services. That's another champion. That we talk about this three branches of government, we needed to have the partnership of all three. I think most people don't recognize that since 1987, it has been clearly recognized that pretrial release is the norm, not pretrial detention, and that was decided by a Republican-based U.S. Chief Justice Winckers in 1987. But again, this partnership cannot be understated, and it has something to do with the remarkable 1947 Constitution of New Jersey. We have the strongest chief elected official, chief governor, strongest chief justice, and a strong Senate president and speaker. And when they collectively come together, as they did in this particular reform, remarkable changes can take place. Again, leadership is critically important to this. You heard both of the attorney generals, former attorney generals, talking about the dual system errors. That is, rich people who had access to money can get released, and poor people who did not have access to money would be detained. There is a law that's still on our books. It's called a bail source list, a bail source statute, which tried to get behind a drug dealer who had money, and judges could bring that person into court and actually prove that the money was not secured from illicit purposes. That was some of the challenges that was taking place. You heard about the consequences. Clearly, if you are detained, you are going to be more likely to be placed to plead because you can plead guilty under time served and get out of jail. You are more likely to receive a prison sentence. You are more likely to receive a harsher prison sentence. And then that possibility of losing your job, of losing custody of your children, and losing the opportunity to live in your community. And so I want to turn to the success of the program. We are now a national model. Public Defender Kokora and Alex Alone and I have traveled across the country talking about the success of this program. Been far west as Arizona, we've talked to people from Florida, Delaware, New York, all kinds of places about the wonderful model that was created. Now, for the first time, people can be detained based upon dangerousness. And today, approximately 70+% of the defendants that are detained are being detained for first and second degree offenses. We also created, if you're going to be detained, speedy trial timeframes. 90 days to indict, 180 days to bring the case to trial, and try to bring a resolution within 2 days, and there are about 13 exclusionary factors. But this compromise recognized that if we're going to put somebody in jail without the opportunity to get out, that there had to be meaningful timeframes. Here's the success of the program. As you heard, in 2012, there was a study done which said 1 out of every 8 defendants in our county jails were being detained on bails of $2,500 or less. In 2015, there were almost 9,000 people in our county jails. In 2018 and 2019, less than 5,000 people were in our county jails. And even with COVID, we are still 25%, almost 25% have less defendants detained in our county jails. By any measure, that is a success of a program. But what we're also doing is recognizing that disparity, as you saw, in 2012, there were 12%, or 1 out of 8 defendants that were being detained. And you see in 21, 4 defendants being detained on bails of less than $2,500. And bail is not eliminated from our statute. It's just no longer a primary option. That's a success. As you see, the first and second degree defenses are where most people are being detained in our county jails. That is an unknown cost because those people will not be allowed to commit another offense while out in the community. And that's something that people need to recognize. For me, there are three critical things that I would ask people to take away from this conversation. Number one, it represented extraordinary compromise and outstanding collaboration and commitment and communication by the governor, by the Senate president, by people such as the 5 attorney generals that I have dealt with doing this program. Public Defender Kokora and Alex Alone have been critical components. And number two, there is a willingness to recognize that dangerous now, you can be put in jail. So it is something that we believe is a national model that should be celebrated. The Arnold Foundation serves as our foundation because we use a public safety tool that was developed by the foundation, and we owe them a great deal of thanks for their great work as well. So we're excited about what's going on. Will there be changes? Yes, there will always be changes to the statute based upon data, not to be based upon other factors, but data should drive whether we should adjust. And my final point is the Chief Justice has now established another joint committee on criminal justice reform, and we will start our conversations in the next couple of weeks to saying how we can still detain the high-risk people while ensuring low-risk people are allowed back in the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge. Those are just startling stats, so thank you for going through those with us. So, Joe, you've been New Jersey Public Defender for about a decade, I believe, right? About 12 years?
Almost 12 years.
And so, talk about your role and your position before and after, and what you have seen and experienced.
So I'm going to put a slightly different focus on this. And I think the beauty of the collaboration that led to this reform was that not everyone supported it for the same reason, right? So on one hand, you had the law enforcement side that was seeking to detain the high-risk violent criminals without bail so that wealthy defendants, and let's face it, you could be a billionaire and a serial killer. They're not mutually exclusive, so people would be able to get out. And from our perspective, and I can tell you so many days when I started out as a trial attorney in Essex, where a client would come in on a burglary charge, and you'd say, Judge, his family can make $2,000. And the judge would set bail at $3,000. And so you would have these relatively low risk, charged with relatively minor offenses, and they would sit in jail, as has been pointed out, until they either pleaded guilty and got time served. And so it was a fundamentally flawed system. On the other hand, when we had clients charged with murder or sexual assault, the judge would pretend that the $500,000 bail was being set because that was the amount that would assure this person returned to court. When everyone in the courtroom knew that the reason the bail was being set at $500,000 is the person was a danger to the community and likely to commit a violent crime if released. So it was a very intellectually dishonest system. I took a lot of pushback in the public defender community for supporting a system that would result in pretrial detention without bail. But in my mind, it was such a flawed system that this was a far better system. And if I'm going to be honest about it, right now in New Jersey, there are very few of our clients who are in jail who would have been able to post bail under the prior system. Because the majority of them, they're indigent, they're represented by the Public Defender's Office, and they would not have been able to post a $250,000 bail on a robbery charge. So are there some people in jail who may have been able to bail themselves out of the prior system charged with serious crimes? Maybe, probably, but not very many, and they're not our clients. So, so to me, this is an incredible improvement. I'm like so proud of what we've done to make this work. And I will just add this, and Judge Grant alluded to it a moment ago. In this climate where you hear about the increase in crime, the pandemic, the increase in car thefts, and legislators trying to suggest that maybe we need to change the Criminal Justice Reform Act because that's the reason there's more crime, they're missing the point. If you can show me that the people who are committing crimes now were out on pretrial release because they should have been detained and weren't, so be it. But we know that's not true. there is really no correlation between the pretrial release system and the uptick in crime. And all the data proves that. So if we're going to change the Criminal Justice Reform Act, it's got to be based on the same premise that it was built on, which is a reliance on data and analytics to identify the truly high-risk people. And right now in New Jersey, the people in jail are charged with serious crimes, as Judge Graham pointed out, or they are people who have been arrested multiple times while on pretrial release and have proven that they are a risk to commit another offense by their conduct on pretrial release. And that's who we want to be in jail. And so I hope that the power brokers of the world, the legislators, understand that there really is no correlation between the uptick in crime and the Criminal Justice Reform Act. The rate of recidivism has not gone up. The rate of people not showing in court has not gone up. And it would really be a shame if we were to disrupt what undoubtedly is the best and fairest pretrial release system in the country. So thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, Joe. So Alex, you're batting cleanup here.
I'm hitting fifth.
Thanks for pointing that out, Alex. But, so two things. You know, the governor recently has said, you can be tough on crime and smart on crime. And so in your perch at the ACLU, I want to ask you if you agree with that or not. And also, I think Joe is speaking, though, generally about New Jersey. And you and I live in a world where a lot of the information is flowing from New York and New York media and New York news at night, where the system is very different. And so I wonder if you would address both those things. Can you be tough on crime and smart on crime? And also, why is New Jersey better from your perspective versus what we're seeing on the news out of New York?
Yeah, so I agree with, thank you first of all for having me.
Yeah.
But I agree with Joe and everyone who's spoken that New Jersey's is the preeminent system in the country. Judge Grant is right, we've been asked to travel all over the country and asked by various stakeholders, prosecutors, judges, defenders, how can we get something like New Jersey? I will say, disappointingly, Hawaii hasn't asked, but we would go. But I think, and some of the structural things about New Jersey are true. We have a very powerful chief executive. We also have very powerful attorneys general. We have a powerful and not elected chief justice. We have one public defender. Those things really did help us get where we were going. Our system is great. I also think there's a lot of misinformation in the news, not just about our system, but also about New York's and also about Pennsylvania, right? So we're in this weird, we have all these media markets. Our system is different than New York's, and it is better, but there's also data that shows that there's the correlation between bail reform changes in New York and recidivism are either non-existent or positive, meaning we're doing better. And let me just talk about why that might be, why letting people out of jail might actually be good for public safety. Let's go back to the turkey example, right? That person who steals a turkey and then is in jail for 6 months or whatever it is until she has an opportunity to plead guilty, now has a family at home with no means of supporting themselves, other than possibly stealing other turkeys. And so letting her out of jail and having a chance to have a job, keep her apartment, keep her health care, those things are actually good for public safety. When we don't disrupt people's lives needlessly, we are promoting public safety. And that gets, Bill, to your first question. Can you be smart on crime and tough on crime? And the answer is absolutely. If we just are reactive and play to anecdotes and misinformation, then we're not processing what we need to process to figure things out. So actually, I'm the outsider in this group. When Governor Christie was talking about his cabinet, he was obviously talking about Joe, who as public defender was a member of his cabinet. I'm not, but I have so much pride in what was done here and how well it's worked. So let's talk about how well it's worked. I'm not suggesting that correlation and causation are the same thing and that the reason crime is how it is because of bail, but to the people who say crime is going up and it's because of bail reform, let's look at a couple things. First of all, crime isn't going up. Shootings in New Jersey are down 25% this year. In every major city, they're down double digits. So auto theft has gone up since the pandemic, but crime since 2014, when this bill was in, right, that's the question. What has happened to crime? And so auto theft has gone up, but murder has gone down, rapes have gone down, robberies have gone down, assaults have gone down, and larcenies have gone down. I think that's a trade anyone who cares about public safety would take. I'm looking at my prosecutor friends in the room, and of course we should care about auto thefts, but we should really also care about murders and rapes and robberies and shootings. And I'm not saying they're down because of bail reform, but they're certainly not up.
Sure.
And so we can't look at trends in the last year and blame it on bail reform when bail reform has been fully operational for 6 years now. It just doesn't make sense. Last word, if I can.
Yeah, sure.
We're not perfect. This system is not perfect and will need to evolve. But the beauty of this process is we sat down together, people who couldn't agree about what to order for lunch, right? It's not every day that the Attorney General and the ACLU are on the same side of the issue, that the public defender and the county prosecutors are on the same side of an issue. But we all agreed that this system we were creating, far from perfect, was so much better than the one it replaced. And that it has proven it. We've dropped our pretrial jail population without compromising public safety, and we did it because we were looking at data. And if we continue to do that, we will make improvements in the system. But if we do it by looking at anecdotes, and this officer says this,
Right.
and this mayor says that, then we're gonna go down a really perilous path.
I think General Perino wanted to jump in, and Jeff, I want to encourage you too, as General, because you just mentioned Prosecutor Sutherland from Cape May County. Thank you for being here. Former Prosecutor Scott Cafina who served in Burlington after being in the Governor's Counsel's office. But we haven't. I know you wanted to respond to what Alex was saying, but from the local prosecutor's perspective and the tools that they have and the responsibility they have with the local judges in terms of using that public safety assessment and using it in the right way. You want to talk about that?
So in 2017, when the Reform Act became effective, law enforcement was going crazy. I mean, those of us who were in law enforcement, county prosecutors, police chiefs, police officers, were going nuts. Just like they are went crazy in New York, and they had a challenge out in Illinois, which has been successful. But we were under a tremendous amount of pressure from our law enforcement partners, who were all saying, "This is crazy. All these people are being let out when we were able to, detain the turkey-stealing woman on Thanksgiving. We can't do that anymore." And we said right then, right as the reform was becoming effective, we never said it was going to be perfect. And we also never said it was going to be easy, okay? But what we did was we worked together as a group, and I went back and I looked, and I recalled that we acknowledged pretty early on, April of 2017, that things weren't perfect. It was a work in progress. Now, the governor didn't call the legislature back into session to change the law and to upset that very delicate balance that had been reached. Instead, what we did is we worked together to try and find ways to tweak the system. In some instances, we worked together and still sort of as adversaries. I mean, as the three of you remember, we in the Attorney General's office made an application to change how certain offenses would be treated under the PSA, and not everybody agreed with that. And I'm looking at the article that reflects that Joe Krikora, wrote a letter taking a position, as did Alex, with respect to that. And the judiciary did what it did and made, some tweaks, not everything we wanted, but we got some of it. And on we went. We didn't need a legislative upheaval. We didn't need changes to the law, because once Parimal Garg, the chief counsel of the governor, said it last night, it's the right way to describe it. Once you start to make changes to this law, that balance, which was so delicate and so difficult to reach, that Governor Christie and Chief Justice Radner and the legislature was able to miraculously find in 2014, you pull on one thread, it all starts to move. And I would say, there are ways to make tweaks if tweaks need to be made. The most recent data on car thefts actually, suggests that the numbers are going down again. So before everybody gets so excited, we got to, upend this incredible model, national model of reform because car thefts are up. Let's take a look at the numbers, because they're actually, in the first part of this year, gone down and have hit, from what I understand, they're now below the 5-year average.
Bill, I would also add that the judiciary made changes to what we call the decision-making framework based upon the advocacy of the Attorney General's office, but we recently also made some statutory changes to the law based upon law enforcement's concerns about weapons and gun violence. And so there was a series of Graves Act weapon charges were now creating a presumption, a prima facie evidence of detention. That is, again, representing the dynamics of looking at the data. And the data said that there were certain high-risk people that were having access to weapons and creating concerns for the community. And that was an appropriate adjustment that was based upon the data that we saw.
It's a great point. So glad that you brought that out. As I think everybody has said, it's not perfect. And with data, with experience, we can make amendments like related to the Graves Acts and those gun-related offenses. Jeff, did you want to add anything further on that, or?
No, and this point's been made already, Bill, but if you look at this panel, I think Alex said it, you're going to see this on too many CLE programs that you're going to attend, this group together. But his point's the right one. No one here thinks that public safety is a bad thing. We may not agree on exactly how to get there. We may not agree on every one of the offenses that should be included, but we agree that public safety is an important part of keeping our communities safe and keeping our state a place where we all want to live. And so when that group comes together, to Chris's point, that last one that he made, Governor Christie had a bunch of things that he did where people would say, you know what, it's not perfect. And he's like, I understand that, but it's really good. And I'm not going to mess with it right now, because if I do, it's going to be much worse than where we started, because it's so hard. And Chris summarized it great, but bringing that group together, just getting everybody to show up to the meeting, forget about agreeing to some kind of legislation or some kind of program, just getting everybody in the room together is a Herculean task. And he did it over and over again. And you know from your experience, Bill, how hard that is. And so tweaks need to be made. We've all agreed that this isn't a perfect system, but you can see from the statistics that we're talking about the improvements that have been made and how quality of life in New Jersey and for families who should not be disrupted because they don't have $1,500 have improved.
And you know, Bill, I'm going to jump in. The point that Chris made is a really important one. There are many tools that are available to make the kind of slight tweaks that we all acknowledge have to be made over time. The prosecutor's attorney general has those tools in decision-making, because remember, no one can be detained unless the prosecutors move for detention, right? And so there's guidance that the attorney general can give to prosecutors on that point. The judiciary, as Judge Grant points out, they can tweak the decision-making framework. They can provide guidance to judges on how to assess motions for detention. And then there's legislation. Then there's judicial cases. I mean, my office, I argued 2 or 3 cases in the first couple of years that were important cases to define the parameters of the Criminal Justice Reform Act, and the Supreme Court made rulings. And so there was compromise in those rulings to some extent. But so the legislative tool should be the last resort.
Michelle, we have a time for just a question or two. So this great audience, a lot of brain power in this room. I think I forgot Prosecutor Suarez is here. Thank you for coming. A question from any member of our audiences. Seeing no. I'm sorry, where? Oh, yes.
The obvious
Andrew.
contrast, of course, is right across the river.
Right.
And your earlier question, Bill, poked at that there. But I'm just interested in the panel's perspective as to why there is such resistance to the notion of the consideration of dangerousness across the river. And how can you evangelize to that body politic to make them understand that there might be a better way?
So you're right, that there is a resistance. New York is the only state right now where the only consideration a judge can take into account is risk of flight. And as Joe said, I think there are times that leads to an intellectually dishonest approach, where any reasonable judge is thinking about dangerousness, but they sometimes, as in New York, can't say it. And I think the concern, which is a very legitimate concern that New York advocates have, is that dangerousness often takes on lots of ugly forms, like discrimination, right? This perception of dangerousness can morph into proxies for other things. My own view is that what we've done well in New Jersey, we haven't eliminated bias from the system, but we've forced judges to place statements on the reasons if they, so there's a presumption of release for most crimes, there's a presumption of detention for limited crimes, and if a judge deviates from that presumption, she must explain why that happened, right? And that is subject to judicial review. So we have some safeguards in place, again, not perfect, but I think it gets us a long way. I will say, I know how much labor the judiciary has put in with their colleagues across the river. I know how much labor Joe has put in. Lots of us have. I think there's a kind of deeply entrenched skepticism, and I think some of that skepticism is fair, but I think New Jersey shows that it can be done well. One thing I want to say in the spirit of this institute, right, which is supposed to talk about cooperation and so forth, I want to say two quick things. The first is, I watched Governor Christie's kind of evolution in public speaking on bail, and the first thing we heard about was the 2020 press conference. We need to be able to detain dangerous people. And I think if, as I said, I'm the outsider, I don't really pretend to know you, but I think that's why he came to this issue. The ability to, like the federal system, detain the highest risk individuals. But I'll tell you that when we got into the summer of 2014, when he's calling back the legislature, he's telling stories about Joe's clients who are losing their jobs. And he's talking about modern day debtors' prisons. I almost sent him an ACLU card. I mean, he's talking about and so I say that for the following reason. It's that I don't think this was just actually about compromise for the governor and the people in his orbit. I think it was about recognizing that to make a system work, you need to do both. Which is to say, it wasn't just a political quid pro quo. It was also, well, it's unfair to have poor people detained when they're low risk. And that might not have been the genesis of his support, but it came to it. And I think one thing that makes New Jersey so remarkable is, you know, Chris was talking about it. We fought about this stuff both in advocacy with the judiciary and in court. Joe talked about the cases. We were on opposite sides of the aisle from Chris, and at no point did anyone say, and therefore we should return to a system where the size of your wallet dictates your freedom. Everyone fought hard for what they want. Sometimes we won, sometimes we lost. At the end of the day, we shook hands and said, well, this system, no matter what, is a ton better than the one it replaced.
The only thing I would respond to about that is, and I know this because I was there, I know how important the addiction issues were to you from the beginning, and how you never thought incarcerating people because they had addiction issues made any sense. And no one was going to accuse him of being soft on crime. That was not an issue for Governor Christie at any point as the former U.S. attorney. And so it's the only thing I would say, having been in the room at the time, all of those things are part of the discussion. Yes, that we led with what we were talking about because it made common sense to people who've been federal prosecutors. But from 2010 and before, because of all your work, the stuff he was doing, I know how important those issues were to him. And it may have evolved over time, but it was not a heavy lift to convincing him of those issues.
Totally fair. I wasn't trying to suggest he didn't care about it.
Right.
It wasn't the lead point.
I'm going to add one other comment of my own to Andrew's question is, on the New York side, I don't think, and her name has only been mentioned once tonight, but there's no Sandy Cunningham over in the New York side, and a Chris Christie to work with Sandy Cunningham and get it done. That's the short answer to Alex's point. Listen, we're just after 8 o'clock, so I want to close it down with a couple of bookkeeping things before in housekeeping things before I invite the governor up to close it down as well. But I want to thank our sponsors tonight. You're going to hear from Virginia Bursch from Arnold Ventures here in a second. But we also want to thank for their support tonight Community Options, South Jersey Industries, IBEW Local 102, and the O'Toole Scrivo Law Firm. So thank you for underwriters for being here. I want to thank Seton Hall Law and everybody here for putting us back together. It's great to be back, as the governor said, as where we started with Governor Cuomo. So with that, let me call up for Virginia. Arnold Ventures has been a leader in funding and advancing this exact debate across the country. And so we really appreciate on such short notice at Virginia that you were willing to step up and support us tonight. And so we want to give you the last word before I introduce the governor.
Yeah, thank you all. And I want to thank Governor Christie. I want to thank this esteemed panel for your commitment. We wouldn't be where we are today in this field without all of you. You all are change agents. And I want to recognize you as such. I brought something to show you. some of you may recognize this. This is not my remarks. This is New Jersey's criminal justice reform toolkit that was written in 2015. It is 400-plus pages of vision, values, educational materials that were used across the state. And I am not a person to keep paper around, but I have kept this binder for almost 7 years. And I show it to new team members that come to Arnold Ventures to illustrate 4 ideas. The complexity of systems change, the commitment change requires from everyone involved, what exceptional collaboration looks like, and why it's worth it. And I think all of the panelists tonight have touched on that from, and that means a lot to me personally as someone who started working at Arnold Ventures when your bill was passed and working from the national lens. And I can tell you from Arnold Ventures' position, you all are the national model for our pretrial justice work. Your legislation is the most comprehensive legislation implemented in this country. It was masterfully implemented by many people in this room. And you have heard tonight the results that criminal justice reform is effective. And I had planned to talk about those results, but I think they have been spoken about exhaustively. So I will just say a little bit about the evidence that, we entered this pretrial conversation really before there was a national conversation, and you all did too. And we lifted up evidence. We lifted up new evidence. We lifted up decades-old evidence. And the evidence led us to center our work on judicial decision-making and risk assessment. And we called our assessment the public safety assessment because ultimately, judges bear the responsibility of assessing risk and making decisions about community safety. Evidence also led us to recognize the stakes of pretrial decisions that are incredibly high. We've talked a little bit about this tonight, but pretrial detention is associated with a higher likelihood of failing to appear for court, for being rearrested while on release, for pleading guilty, for being convicted, for being sentenced to jail and prison, for receiving longer sentences, especially if you're charged with lower level charges. And we've talked about the harms that often go unseen, that stays in jail cost housing, they cost jobs, they break families apart. And so we do use jails. We use jails when necessary. But understanding the stakes, I think, leads us to think about the core values in pretrial justice that all of these speakers have talked about tonight: liberty, safety, accountability, and supervision and supports for people released. These are a guide to how we use jails across the country. Our North Star, just to tell you just briefly, is the elimination of unjust pretrial detention, that people are presumed innocent, that people are, that liberty isn't determined by the money you have. We believe judges should have the authority to detain, that people should be held accountable for violations of their release, that also judges, prosecutors, jails should be accountable for speedy case resolution, and that some people may be supported by things such as court reminders, childcare, supervision while on release. But the issue is, how do we get to a system that actually promotes those values? And fortunately for us, as you've heard tonight, New Jersey is that system that's applied those values that advocacy groups across the country look to. You encompass all of these values all at once, and your law is what so many in the field are working towards, what people believe in principle, in practice, in scholarship. And you envisioned a system that eliminated wealth-based detention, but also had the foresight to think about what is a workable system that doesn't rely on money, that ensures that people are released safely, that judges have the authority to detain, that there are options for judges when people are being released, that there are speedy trial provisions to make sure people's cases are processed efficiently, and that, as General Perino says, that delicate balance has been achieved. And I think when we look at states across the country, we want states to accomplish what New Jersey has, and I think a lot of it is just recognizing that that delicate balance, balancing increased detention authority with reduced role of money, with strong due process protections, is what we want to see replicated in states across the country. So I just want to say tonight that it's really an honor to be here, to be in a group of people who've accomplished so much. When bipartisan leaders come together to solve these complex problems, this spirit of collaboration is here. It applies to any challenges ahead for New Jersey. And over 6 years in, we just want to see this state protect this win for pretrial justice, to preserve the values, the effectiveness of your reforms, while continuing to work together on new challenges. And that is for the people of New Jersey, and that is for the people across this country that I work with on a daily basis who look to your leadership. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to sponsor this conversation.
Thank you, Virginia. I can see why Arnold Ventures has you doing what you're doing across the country. So thank you so much. One last housekeeping item I failed to mention. We'll be right back here on April 12th with the governor and Senator Booker. And so that registration is open online, so you can go to the Christie Institute website, and we'll be right back here. Dean, thanks again for your hospitality. So, Governor, give you the last word. I know we didn't even tell you this, but I think as you look back on your accomplishments, and I know you and I have had this conversation many times, and so whether it's the response to Superstorm Sandy, fixing the policing problem in Camden from top to bottom, giving Rutgers a medical school, beginning the fixing of pension and health benefit reform, which you did down in the joint McGuire Lakehurst base down there for those jobs and our safety and our national security down there. This accomplishment will rank up there with all of them. So thanks for all you've done. Thanks everybody for coming. So I'll give the governor the last word.
It's really great after listening to all this tonight and hearing Bill. I now don't have to attend my own funeral. It's been really good. So hearing all the really good points, Jeff, Chris, good rehearsal. Very good, guys. Look, a couple of things that after our sitting and listening, I wanted to make clear to everybody, because there's no way for the folks who are sitting up here, even for Jeff and Chris, to know kind of what was going through my head when I wanted to do this. And it really was a pretty simple premise that started it. And that is that every life is a precious gift from God. And I don't think that people start their analysis there, but they should. Because every life is a precious gift from God. Whether it's the 16-year-old drug-addicted young woman on the floor of the county lockup, or whether it's the woman who stole the turkey because she couldn't afford it and wanted to give her kids something on Thanksgiving. People make mistakes. We are fallible. And we prove that every day, both publicly and privately. And so the question becomes, if we're going to believe that every life is an individual gift from God and is precious, then how do we deal with those that are the most flawed and the most troubled in our society? And that's on both ends of this problem, right? It's the ones who commit the crime, and it's folks who are the victims of that crime, and how it affects their lives, their ability to go out and walk down the block to shop for their food, their ability to be able to walk down the street to go and visit a neighbor or a friend. All those things play into it. And so, yeah, it offended me, and Alex is right. It offended me greatly that essentially we were running a debtor's prison in this state. And that, they were talking about $1,500 and $2,500, but understand how little that is. They could put a 10% cash option. We're talking about $150 or $250. Someone was staying in jail for 6 months because they didn't have that. Well, to me, that's just wrong. On the other hand, it is also wrong to have folks who are regularly committing violent crime and profiting from it and go back out and not only commit more crimes in general, but also, as the prosecutors in this room will tell you, commit crimes to intimidate or in fact kill witnesses to make their case go away. None of that is acceptable. So that's where my head was when we started to do this and why I was motivated to push for it. And, you know, I had even forgotten that I had been carping and complaining about this for 2 years before they actually did something. I shouldn't have forgotten because nothing ever went easy, but it took a long time to talk to folks about this. The other part that I think is really important is to understand that our 8 years was a very unique coming together of two levels of government. You know, I remember Steve Sweeney saying to me when I first became governor that I had brought 29 former assistant United States attorneys into state government. And he told me it was going to be one of the biggest mistakes I ever made because none of these people understand state government. And I said to him, that's exactly why I brought them. They don't understand state government, they understand me. And I want them to go out there and act as I would act on my behalf. And that worked most of the time. Once in a while, people misunderstood that. But I will tell you that it's because Stuart Rabner and I worked together for 3 years. He understood where I was coming from and trusted me. And we both had a shared federal system that we saw worked with these considerations. So it was not mysterious to us. And so Chris Perino was defending folks in the federal system. Jeff was in the office. Charlie McKenna was in the office. Michelle Brown was in the office. Any number of folks who were integral in all this were there, Paul Mady as well. And all of those folks had that shared experience. And we could bring that to the state and give them this gift. And that's really what I think it is. It is a gift. Because the fact that there's only 4 people, Your Honor, you know, I'll sleep better tonight knowing that number. Because there shouldn't be the number of people that were in there before. And that's what this is all about. And so, I think, Michelle, we invited the entire legislature, right? We did. And so I'm really glad that the only responsible member of the state legislature, Senator Mike Testa, is here tonight. Stand up, Mike. Now, I'm going to impress you even more because Testa is from Cumberland County. Now, most of the people in this room, Mike, don't even know where Cumberland County is. But let me tell you something. That's true. Mike is going to drive 2 hours from here tonight before he gets 45 minutes within the distance of his house. So, you know, that's the kind of commitment that we need, is for legislators to come and to listen. And I don't expect Mike to do everything that I tell him to do. Only if I was governor, right, Jim, would we expect that he would do everything that we tell him to do. But now as a former governor, what I want people to understand is that I understand politics fairly well. And I understand we have an election in November and that everybody's going to be trying to manipulate any issue they can to try to bring themselves some political benefit. And I get it, and I'm all okay with that. Except when you're violating what got me into this in the first place, which is to put at risk precious human lives. That's different. And our job, first and foremost, has to be to protect the lives of the people of this state, both the potential victims of crime and those people who would, if bad changes were made, unjustly find themselves in prison again in a way that destroys their spirit, destroys their families and their friends. And those are things that we can't accept either within a system that, while you're all right, it's not perfect, but it is the best imperfect system out there. So this is why we started this institute, is to have conversations like this, to bring people together with whom truth is not negotiable. What bothers me the most about our public life right now is truth seems to be negotiable based upon which cable channel you put on and which person you're listening to. So we're trying to make sure that we bring people in front of you on a regular basis for whom truth is not negotiable. And all 5 of these folks up here fit that category. I'll end with this, that April 12th, it's me and Cory Booker. I am telling you, I'm gonna make sure that truth cannot be negotiable with Booker, all right? We have known each other now, Cory and I, believe it or not, for 21 years. And I met Cory Booker when he was running the first time for mayor of Newark against Sharp James. And I'll end this with one story because this has been pretty heavy shit tonight and we need to have a little levity. So Jeff will remember this, Charlie, Ralph Mara, my first assistant, is here. Will remember that when this election was happening, Booker had a lot of supporters in the Ironbound among the Portuguese community. And it seemed coincidentally that a lot of Sharp James supporters, when there would be a Booker rally, were regularly going to the Ironbound and beating the hell out of all the people who were supporting Booker. So I went to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department of the Bush administration and said, we need to get monitors for this election from civil rights to make sure that everybody's civil rights are protected and everybody can vote. The Bush administration, which I'm generally very proud of being a member of, disappointed me in this one. They came back and said, we can't do it because Portuguese, Armando, are not minorities. They're Europeans. And I said, believe me, in Newark, they're minorities. But they didn't buy it, and so I went. I was really frustrated. I'd been the U.S. attorney for about 4 months, and I was really frustrated. So I decided to go down to the law library myself and start reading the civil rights law and decide whether I had the authority to be able to do it on my own. Charlie McKenna was my executive assistant, and he was immediately alerted by my secretary, rightfully, that, oh my God, he's gone to the library. So Charlie came down to the library to see me, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm gonna try to figure this problem out. And he goes, you have 130 people here who would like wet themselves to do this project for you. Like, let someone else do it. And I said, I'm a lawyer, I can do this. And Charlie gave me a bit of advice that day that I used in every day of my public life. He said, that's fine, I'm sure you can, being condescending. He said, I'm sure you can, but who's doing what only you can do while you're doing this? And so we turned the project over. We found out that we really didn't have the authority to do it. They came back to me and I said, well, shit, we're doing it anyway. So I called the head of the FBI, the head of the Marshal Service, and the head of the DEA and told them that if they wanted any of their cases prosecuted going forward, that they had to donate 30 agents each to be election monitors. They all came through and said, yes, sir, and they gave me 30 each. And I then called the 2 mayoral candidates with an hour-and-a-half gap between the meetings to come to have me inform them that we're gonna do this. Cory Booker comes in with 8 staff people. And they begin to question me about which wards I'm gonna be in, which precincts, how many people. They have suggestions they'd like to tell me. And I'm standing there looking at Booker like, I'm doing this for you, man. Like, what are you doing? I dragged him into my office and shut the door and I said, I'm doing this to make sure you're treated fairly. I said, what I would suggest is you go back in the room, look at me and say, thank you very much, and get the hell out of here. And he said, sounds good. Came in, told his guys, thank you very much, very good, we're leaving. Next, an hour and a half later came in Mayor Sharp James, who some of you may remember that years later, we wound up encountering each other again, and he wound up, doing some time. But he came in by himself. Not a lawyer, not a staff member, not a body person. Here comes Sharp James by himself. I start to explain what we're gonna do, and Sharp James looks at me and says, I just have one question. are you going to oversee this personally? And I said, yes, Mayor, I am. And he goes, well, then the fairest man in the state of New Jersey is going to oversee this election. I have no problem, and you're going to help me stop that young man from stealing this election from me. I was sitting there in that room with Ralph Mara and with Paula Dow, who later became the Essex County prosecutor and my first attorney general. And when James got up to leave, he shook my hand and he left. And I turned to Ralph and to Paul and I said, well, James is winning this election. And they said, why do you say James is going to win? I said, did you see this act the last hour and a half? I said, the one guy can't say thank you without 8 aides telling him what to do. And the other guy who came in had nobody, probably has committed more crimes than I can count. And he comes into the U.S. Attorney's office with not a moment of fear, calls me the fairest guy in New Jersey, and says, okay, I'm out of here. Do whatever you need to do. The election happens, no violence anywhere. These agents were everywhere. They did a great job. AUSAs, as you'll remember, volunteered as well to monitor. I put 30 of mine up, says they put 30 of theirs up. And at the end of it, the election was nonviolent, fair. Everybody who wanted to vote got to vote, and Sharp James was reelected. So I was driving to Newark the next morning, and my phone rang, and it was an unknown number. So I answered the phone, and he said, is this Chris Christie? And I said, yes, it is. And he goes, well, this is the fairly reelected mayor of Newark, Sharp James. Thank you, young man. And I said, thank you. So we're going to have some fun with stories like that and others with Senator now Booker on April 12th. But we're really going to talk not only about our relationship and the things that we did together, both as U.S. Attorney and Mayor on crime, and as Governor and Mayor on a whole host of issues in the city of Newark, and then as Governor and Senator. But we're also going to talk about the condition and the lack of bipartisanship in this country right now, and how folks like myself and Corey might be able to be helpful in trying to break some of that fever that's going on in the country. So thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it very much.